In a small, sleepy town surrounded by green fields and winding roads, life moved at its own pace. It wasn't the kind of place where big things happened often. People knew each other, waved hello on the streets, and lived simple lives. Among these folks were two brothers, identical twins, who stood out not because they caused trouble, but because they worked hard and kept to themselves. The twins ran a landscaping business together. They woke up early every day, loaded their tools into their old truck, and spent hours trimming hedges, mowing lawns, and planting flowers for anyone who needed help. Their hands were calloused from years of work, but they didn't mind. To them, there was something satisfying about seeing a patch of dirt turn into a beautiful garden. They weren't flashy guys. No expensive clothes, no loud music blasting. From their truck stereo, just two ordinary men trying to make ends meet. And honestly, that's exactly how they liked it, trouble. That was something they avoided like the plague. If someone started an argument, the twins would walk away faster than you could blink. But sometimes, trouble doesn't care if you're looking for it or not, it finds you anyway. One Friday evening, after a long day of work, the twins decided to treat themselves to dinner at a local diner called Patty's Place. It wasn't fancy, but it had good food, friendly staff, and a cozy vibe. Plus, it was one of those rare spots where everyone felt welcome. Whether you were a farmer covered in mud or a kid fresh out of school, when they walked in, the diner was already buzzing with chatter. Some regulars sat at the counter sipping coffee, while others huddled in booths sharing plates of fries. Everything seemed normal until a group of college football players burst through the door. There were 6 of them, all tall and broad-shouldered, wearing matching team jackets. You could tell they'd just come from a game. They were still sweaty, high on adrenaline, and laughing loudly enough to drown out the jukebox playing softly in the background. The moment they entered, the atmosphere shifted. Heads turned, conversations paused, and even the waitresses exchanged nervous glances. These guys weren't strangers. They came to the diner often, especially after games. But tonight, they seemed rowdier than usual. Maybe it was the win, or maybe it was the drinks they'd smuggled in under the table, but whatever the reason, they took over the place like it belonged to them. The twins found a quiet corner booth near the window and slid into their seats. They ordered burgers and sodas, hoping to eat quickly and leave before anything got out of hand. Unfortunately, fate had other plans. As the night wore on, the football players grew louder and more obnoxious. One of them stood on his chair to give an impromptu speech about how awesome he was during the game. Another threw chips across the room, narrowly missing a waitress carrying a tray of food. The whole scene was chaotic, but the twins tried to ignore it. After all, what could they do? Say something and risk stirring up trouble? Nope, better to keep their heads down and focus on their meal. But then, disaster struck. One of the players, a towering guy with a buzz cut, was horsing around with his buddies when he accidentally knocked over Jake's soda. The glass tipped over, spilling sticky liquid all over the table and dripping onto Jake's jeans. For a second, everything went silent. Even the football players stopped laughing as they waited to see what would happen next. At first, Jake didn't say anything. He grabbed a napkin and started wiping up the mess, his jaw tight. His brother Ryan watched him closely, ready to step. And if needed? The player who caused the spill froze, clearly unsure whether to apologize or laugh it off. But instead of saying sorry, he smirked. "Oops," he said sarcastically, shrugging like it was no big deal. "Guess you should have been paying attention." That comment lit the fuse. Jake looked up slowly, his eyes narrowing. "Excuse me?" he asked, his voice low but firm. The player raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "You heard me. Watch where you're sitting next time, buddy." Ryan leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Hey man, it was an accident," he interjected, trying to defuse the situation. No harm done. But the player wasn't interested in backing down. He crossed his arms and leaned closer, his smirk growing wider. "Oh, so now you're sticking up for your little friend here? What's wrong? Afraid he can't handle himself?" The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. The twins exchanged a glance, silently deciding how to handle this. They weren't looking for a fight, but they also weren't going to let some drunk jerk talk down to them. Before Either of them could respond. The player added fuel to the fire. "You two look like a couple of wimps," he sneered, glancing back at his friends, who snickered approvingly. "Bet you couldn't take us on if you tried." Jake set the napkin down and stood up slowly. "We don't want any trouble," he said calmly, holding up his hands. "But if you're looking for a problem, we're not afraid to give you one." For a moment, the entire diner held its breath. The football players exchanged smirks, clearly confident in their size and numbers. They probably thought they were dealing with a couple of pushovers. Who wouldn't dare stand up to them? What they didn't know was that beneath their quiet exteriors, the twins had secrets of their own, and tonight, those secrets were about to come out. The tension inside Patty's diner was so thick you could almost feel it pressing against your chest. The football player, the one who'd knocked over the soda and then insulted the twins, was still smirking, like he thought this whole thing was some kind of joke. His buddies were egging him on, laughing and making snide comments under their breath. Nobody moved to stop them. Even the waitresses kept their distance. Pretending not to notice the brewing storm, Jake stood there, his hands still raised in. A gesture of peace, but his body language told a different story. He wasn't afraid. In fact, if you looked closely, you might have noticed the slight shift in his stance, his feet planted firmly on the ground, his weight balanced evenly, his muscles tensed just enough to spring into action if needed. Ryan sat quietly at the table, watching everything unfold with sharp eyes. He didn't say a word, but his presence alone was enough to signal that he was ready for whatever came next. The football player tilted his head, studying Jake like he was trying to figure out whether this skinny guy standing in front of him was serious or bluffing. "What's the matter?" he taunted, taking a step closer. "You scared? You think we're gonna hurt you?" Jake didn't flinch. Instead, he lowered his hands slowly, letting them hang loosely by his sides. His voice was steady when he spoke. "I already told you we don't want trouble. But if you keep pushing us, you're going to regret it." The room went dead silent. Even the jukebox seemed to pause mid-song. For a split second, the football player hesitated, maybe sensing that something about these two guys wasn't quite right, but pride got the better of him. He glanced back at his friends, who were grinning and nodding like they were watching their favorite show. That was all the encouragement he needed. "Big talk for such a little guy," he said, sneering, as he took another step forward. Then, without warning, he swung his fist straight toward Jake's face. It happened so fast that most people in the diner barely had time to react. 1 second, the player's fist was flying through the air, and the next, Jake had ducked smoothly to the side, avoiding the punch entirely. Before anyone could blink, Jake countered with a quick jab to the player's ribs. It wasn't a hard hit, not yet, but it was enough to make the guy stumble backward. Clutching his side in surprise, the football player froze, staring at Jake like he couldn't believe what had just happened. Neither could his friends. They stopped laughing immediately, their smug expressions replaced by confusion and disbelief. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. These two quiet guys weren't supposed to fight back. They were supposed to back down, apologize, maybe even cry a little. But instead, they were holding their ground. Looking more confident than ever, Ryan finally stood up from the table, moving to stand beside his brother. Together, they formed an unspoken wall, their movements synchronized like they'd rehearsed. This moment 1,000 times before, and in a way they had. Growing up as twins meant always having someone by your side, someone who understood you without needing words. Over the years, they'd learned how to read each other's signals, anticipate each other's actions, and work together like a well-oiled machine. Tonight, that bond was about to be put to the test. The football player recovered quickly from his shock and let out a growl of frustration. "You want to play tough, huh?" he spat, lunging forward again. This time, he aimed for Ryan, figuring he'd catch him off guard. But Ryan was ready. He sidestepped effortlessly, grabbing the player's arm as he passed and twisting it behind his back. The guy yelped in pain, struggling to break free, but Ryan held firm. Meanwhile, the rest of the football players snapped out of their daze and decided it was time to jump in. 4 of them charged toward the twins at once, shouting threats and throwing wild punches. It should have been overwhelming 6 against 2, with the odds clearly stacked against the brothers. But somehow it WS in single quotes. Jake and Ryan moved like they were part of the same body, each covering the other's blind spots. When one of the attackers swung wildly at Jake, he ducked low, allowing Ryan to deliver a swift kick to the guy's knee. Another attacker tried to grab Ryan from behind, only to find himself face to face with Jake's elbow. Every move they made was precise, calculated, and devastatingly effective. One of the football players managed to land a punch on Ryan's shoulder, but it barely fazed him. Ryan spun around, using the momentum to launch a perfect drop kick that sent the guy crashing to the floor. The impact echoed through the diner, drawing gasps from the few customers who hadn't already fled the scene. By now, the football players were starting to panic. Their confidence had crumbled, replaced by fear and confusion. They weren't used to losing fights, especially not to people who looked half their size. One by one, they began to fall, some tripping over each other in their haste to retreat, others collapsing under the force of the twins' combined attacks. The leader, the guy who'd started all of this, was the last one standing. He backed away slowly, his hands raised in surrender, his earlier bravado completely gone. All right, he stammered, shaking his head. We messed up, okay? Just stop. Jake and Ryan exchanged a glance, silently deciding that the fight was over. Their chests rose and fell with exertion, but their expressions remained calm, almost eerily composed. Without saying a word, they turned and walked toward the exit, leaving the football players sprawled across the diner floor, groaning in pain and humiliation. As they stepped outside into the cool night air, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a strange mix of relief and disbelief. What had just happened? 1 minute, they were sitting quietly in a booth, minding their own business. The next, they were fighting off 6 angry football players and winning. It felt surreal, like something out of a movie, but as they climbed into their truck and drove away, neither of them said a word. They didn't need to. They both knew that tonight had changed something bigger than just a random brawl at a diner. Life in their small town would never be the same again. The parking lot outside Patty's Diner was quiet, save for the faint hum of crickets and the occasional car driving past on the nearby road. The cool night air felt refreshing after the heated chaos inside the diner. Jake and Ryan climbed into their truck, their hearts still racing from the adrenaline rush of what had just happened. They didn't speak right away, both lost in their thoughts, replaying the scene in their minds like a movie stuck on repeat. Ryan broke the silence first. Well, he said with a dry laugh, rubbing the back of his neck, that wasn't exactly how I planned to spend my Friday night. Jake chuckled, though there was a hint of disbelief in his voice. Yeah, me neither. I mean, who would have thought we'd end up taking on 6 guys twice our size? Ryan glanced at his brother, his expression softening. You know, it's funny. We've always been the quiet ones, the ones nobody notices, but tonight, he trailed off, shaking his head. Tonight, we showed them something they won't forget anytime soon. Jake nodded slowly, staring out the windshield as he turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, but he didn't pull out of the parking spot just yet. Instead, he sat there for a moment, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Do you think we went too far? He asked finally, his voice quieter now. I mean, we stood our ground, sure. But those guys, they weren't expecting us to fight back like that. Ryan leaned back in his seat, letting out a long breath. Honestly? No, I don't think we went too far. They started it, Jake. They came at us, throwing insults, swinging punches. We didn't have a choice. If we hadn't fought back, who knows what might have happened. Besides, he added with a small smirk, we didn't exactly leave any lasting damage. Just gave them a little lesson in respect. Jake couldn't help but smile at that. A little lesson? You call that dropkick of yours a little lesson? That guy practically flew across the room. Ryan laughed, running a hand through his hair. Okay, fine. Maybe it was more than a little lesson. But hey, sometimes people need a wake-up call, you know? And if a well-placed kick is what it takes to get through to someone, then so be it. For a while, the brothers sat uncomfortable. Silence, watching as the lights from the diner flickered in the distance. Inside, the remaining customers were probably scrambling to clean up the mess left behind by the brawl. Outside, the world seemed eerily calm, as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened at all. But Jake and Ryan knew better. Things had changed for them, for the football players, and maybe even for the town itself, as they finally pulled out of the parking lot and onto the dark, empty road. Jake glanced at Ryan again. "You think anyone saw us leave? Or noticed who we are?" Ryan shrugged. "Hard to say. People were either running out of there or hiding under tables. Either way, word's gonna spread. A fight like that doesn't stay quiet for long, especially not in a place like this." Jake sighed, turning his attention back to the road. "Great. Just what we needed, more attention." Ryan grinned, nudging his brother playfully. "Hey, look at it this way. For once, people will actually remember our names. Not because we're the landscaping guys, but because we're the twins who took down a bunch of football players. That's gotta count for something, right?" Jake rolled his eyes but couldn't suppress a grin. "Yeah, I guess. Still, I'd rather keep a low profile. You know how these things go. One minute, everyone's calling us heroes. The next, they're saying we started it." Ryan nodded, his smile fading slightly. "True, small towns have a way of twisting stories until they barely resemble the truth. But we know what really happened, and that's all that matters." They drove on in silence for a while, the headlights cutting through the darkness as they made their way toward home. Neither of them could shake the feeling that this was only the beginning, that tonight's events would ripple outward, affecting more than just their own lives. But for now, they were content to let the moment sit, to savor the strange mix of pride and unease that came with standing up for themselves. When they finally arrived at their small house on the edge of town, the lights were off and the neighborhood was silent. It was late and most people were already asleep. Jake parked the truck in the driveway and killed the engine, leaving them sitting in the quiet glow of the dashboard lights. "You hungry?" Ryan asked, breaking the silence. "We didn't exactly finish our burgers." Jake laughed, shaking his head. "After all that, nah, I'm good. But maybe tomorrow we can grab breakfast somewhere." "Somewhere far away from Patty's Diner," Ryan grinned. "Deal. Now let's get some sleep. Something tells me we're gonna need it." As they climbed out of the truck and headed inside, neither of them realized just how much their lives were about to change. Word of the fight would spread faster than they imagined, sparking debates, earning them admirers and critics alike, and forcing them to confront questions they'd never expected to face. But for now, they simply closed the door behind them, turned off the lights, and tried to put the chaos of the evening behind them. The next morning, the small town buzzed with chatter. Word of the fight at Patty's Diner had spread faster than anyone could have imagined. By sunrise, it felt like everyone knew about it, the football players, the twins, and the chaos that unfolded in the parking lot. People talked about it over coffee, during church services, and even while waiting in line at the grocery store. For such a quiet place, news traveled surprisingly fast. At first, opinions were divided. Some folks thought the twins were heroes for standing up to the rowdy group of athletes who'd been causing trouble around town for months. Others weren't so sure. They worried that violence wasn't the answer, no matter how justified it might have seemed. A few whispered that maybe the twins had gone too far. Though most agreed the football players had brought it on themselves, Jake and Ryan woke up early, as usual, and went straight to work. They figured keeping busy would help them avoid the spotlight. But avoiding attention was easier said than done. As they drove their truck from one job to another, people stopped them constantly, some to congratulate them, others to ask questions, and a handful just to stare. One elderly woman approached them while they were trimming bush outside a neighbor's house. "I heard what happened last night," she said, her voice warm but firm. "You boys did good. Those football players needed someone to put them in their place." Ryan smiled politely, brushing dirt off his gloves. "We didn't mean for things to get out of hand," he replied. "We were just defending ourselves," the woman nodded knowingly. "Sometimes self-defense is the only way. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." "Not everyone was as supportive?" At the local hardware store, an older man pulled Jake aside while Ryan loaded supplies into the truck. His tone was gruff, almost disapproving. "Look, I'm not saying—" "Those guys weren't asking for it," he began, scratching his chin. "But fighting isn't the solution. You should have walked away." Jake met the man's gaze steadily. "We tried," he said simply. "They didn't give us much of a choice." The man frowned but didn't argue further. Instead, he muttered something under his breath before walking away. It wasn't the first time and wouldn't be the last that someone questioned whether the twins had crossed the line. Despite the mixed reactions, there was one person who remained firmly on their side, the owner of Patty's Diner. She called them later that afternoon, inviting them to stop by when they had a moment. When they arrived, she greeted them with a big smile and a plate of fresh pancakes. "I owe you too," she said, setting the food down in front of them. "Those guys have been terrorizing my customers for weeks. Last night you showed them? They can't just push people around." Jake glanced at Ryan, then back at the diner owner. "We didn't do it for thanks," he said quietly. "We just wanted to protect ourselves." She waved him off. "Still, I appreciate it. And don't worry, I'll make sure everyone knows the truth about what happened. Those boys started it, not you." Her words meant a lot to the twins. They hadn't expected anyone to defend them, especially since rumors were already swirling. Social media hadn't helped either. Videos of the fight had surfaced online, showing snippets of the brawl from different angles. In some clips, the football players looked like bullies picking on two smaller guys. In others, the twins appeared calm and controlled, landing precise hits without losing their composure. Comment sections exploded with arguments, with viewers debating whether the twins were heroes or villains. For Jake and Ryan, the attention was overwhelming. They weren't used to being in the spotlight, and the constant scrutiny made them uneasy. Every knock on their door, every text message, every mention of their names in conversation reminded them of the fight. They tried to focus on work, but it was hard to ignore the weight of what had happened. Then came the fallout for the football players. Their coach suspended the entire team pending an investigation into their behavior. Parents of the players demanded answers, accusing the school of failing to discipline their kids properly. Local newspapers ran stories about the incident, painting the athletes as entitled troublemakers who thought they were above the rules. The pressure mounted until the players issued a public apology, admitting they'd acted recklessly and promising to change their ways. Some people thought the apology was genuine. Others dismissed it as damage control. Either way, it didn't bring much peace to the twins. They knew apologies didn't erase actions, and they couldn't shake the feeling that the whole situation had spiraled out of control. One evening, as they sat on the porch after a long day of work, Ryan broke the silence. "Do you think we'll ever go back to normal?" he asked, staring out at the darkening sky. "Or is this going to follow us forever?" Jake leaned back in his chair, letting out a heavy sigh. "I don't know," he admitted. "Things are different now. Whether we like it or not, people see us differently. We're not just the landscaping guys anymore." Ryan frowned, tapping his fingers against the armrest. "Is that a bad thing? I mean, maybe it's not all bad. People respect us now. They know we won't back down when someone tries to bully us." "Respect is great," Jake replied, turning to look at his brother. "But respect comes with responsibility. People expect more from us now. They'll watch everything we do, judge every move we make. What if we mess up? What if someone thinks we're starting fights instead of finishing them?" Ryan didn't have an answer. He stared at the ground, lost in thought. For the first time, he realized how complicated life could get when you became the center of attention. Before, they'd been invisible, blending into the background of the town. Now they were front-page news. The days passed slowly, each one bringing new challenges. Strangers continued to approach them, asking for advice or sharing their own stories of standing up to bullies. Kids at the high school started calling them legends, idolizing them for taking down the football players. Even the local newspaper wrote a feature article about them, describing them as ordinary men who rose to extraordinary circumstances. While the praise was flattering, it also weighed heavily on the twins. They didn't want to be seen as heroes, they just wanted to live their lives without drama. But they couldn't deny that the fight had changed them too. It had forced them to confront their own strength, both physical and mental, and reminded them that sometimes standing your ground means more than just protecting yourself. It means standing up for what's right. As the weeks went by, the initial frenzy began to die down. Life in the town returned to its usual rhythm, though whispers about the fight lingered. The twins kept working, kept smiling, and kept moving forward. They didn't talk much about what had happened, preferring to let time heal the wounds. But deep down, they knew the experience had left its mark, not just on them, but on everyone involved. And somewhere, amidst all the noise and confusion, they found a strange sense of peace. They had faced adversity head-on and come out stronger. On the other side, whatever the future held, they were ready to face it together. Months passed, and the town slowly returned to its usual rhythm. The excitement over the fight at Patty's Diner faded into quiet whispers, then disappeared altogether. Life moved on as it always does. For Jake and Ryan, things eventually settled into a new kind of normal. People still stopped them occasionally to thank them or ask how they were doing, but the intense spotlight had dimmed. Work kept them busy, and their days became predictable again, mornings spent loading tools into the truck, afternoons trimming hedges and planting flowers, evenings relaxing on the porch with cold drinks. But one day, something unexpected happened. A knock came at the door late in the afternoon, just as the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon. Jake answered it, wiping grease-stained hands on his jeans. Standing on the other side was one of the football players, the leader of the group from that night. He looked different now, less cocky and more subdued. His broad shoulders sagged slightly, and his face carried an expression of genuine regret. "Hey," he said awkwardly, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Can we talk?" Jake hesitated for a moment before stepping aside to let him in. Ryan, who had been sitting on the couch flipping through channels, turned off the TV and stood up. Neither twin spoke as they motioned for the visitor to take a seat at the kitchen table. The silence stretched between them, heavy but not hostile. Finally, the player cleared his throat. "Look, I know you probably don't want to see me," he began, his voice low and hesitant. "And honestly, I wouldn't blame you if you told me to leave, but I needed to say this." He paused, gathering his thoughts. When he continued, his words came out slower, more deliberate. "That night, I was wrong, completely wrong. We came at you guys drunk and angry, thinking we could push you around because we're bigger. That wasn't fair, and it wasn't right. And when you fought back," he shook his head, a mix of shame and admiration flickering across his face. "When you fought back, I realized something. You didn't just stand your ground, you taught us a lesson. About respect, about consequences, and about how actions have meaning whether you mean them to or not." Ryan leaned forward slightly, studying the man across the table. "Why are you here?" he asked bluntly. "What do you want from us?" The player sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness," he admitted. "I don't deserve it. But I wanted to apologize, to tell you that I've thought a lot about what happened that night. It made me realize some things about myself. Things I didn't. Like," Jake crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. "Like what?" "Like how I treated people," the player replied. "Not just you guys, but everyone. I've always been big, always been strong, so I figured I could get away with stuff. I never stopped to think about how my actions affected others until that night." He glanced down at his hands, which were clasped tightly together. "You two showed me that size doesn't matter. What matters is how you handle yourself, how you treat people." For a long moment, no one said anything. The twins exchanged a glance, silently weighing the sincerity of the apology. Finally, Ryan broke the silence. "It takes guts to come here and say all that," he said, his tone softer now. "We appreciate it." Jake nodded slowly. "Yeah, and we accept your apology. But remember this, it's not just about saying sorry. It's about changing. If you really mean what you're saying, prove it. Show the people around you that you've learned something." The player looked up, surprise flashing in his eyes. Then he smiled faintly, nodding. "I will," he promised. I already am. Things are different now for me, for the team. We're working on being better, not just as athletes, but as people. The conversation went on for a while longer. The player shared how the incident had forced him to rethink his priorities. Football had always been his identity, but now he understood there was more to life than winning games or throwing your weight around. He talked about meeting with a counselor, joining community service projects, and even mentoring younger kids who looked up to him. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. By the time he left, the tension in the room had eased significantly. As the door closed behind him, Jake and Ryan stood in silence for a moment, processing everything that had been said. "You believe him?" Ryan asked finally, leaning against the counter. Jake shrugged. "I think he means it. Whether he follows through, that's up to him." Ryan nodded, folding his arms. "Either way, it's good to hear he's trying. Everyone deserves a second chance." They didn't dwell on it much after that. Life went back to its usual routine, but the encounter stayed with them. It reminded them that even in moments of conflict, there's potential for growth for everyone involved. They hadn't set out to teach anyone a lesson that night. They'd simply defended themselves. But sometimes, standing up for what's right can inspire change in ways you never expect. As the weeks turned into months, the twins noticed subtle shifts in the town. The football players, once notorious for their rowdy behavior, started showing up at community events and volunteering alongside other residents. Kids at the high school began looking up to them for different reasons, not because they were tough, but because they were making an effort to be better. Jake and Ryan kept working hard, staying humble, and keeping their heads down. They didn't seek recognition or praise, but they couldn't deny that their lives and the lives of those around them had changed because of that one chaotic night. In a way, they felt proud of what they'd accomplished, not just in the parking lot, but in the days that followed. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Ryan broke the comfortable silence. "You ever think about how weird life is?" he mused, sipping his soda. "One minute, you're just two regular guys trying to stay out of trouble. The next, you're the center of attention, teaching lessons you didn't even mean to teach." Jake chuckled, shaking his head. "Yeah, life's funny like that. Sometimes the smallest choices lead to the biggest changes." Ryan grinned, nudging his brother playfully. "Well, whatever happens next, I'm glad we're in it together." Jake smiled, raising his drink in a mock toast. "To sticking together no matter what." "To sticking together?" Ryan echoed, clinking his glass against Jake's, and as the sky turned shades of orange and pink, the twins sat quietly, content in the knowledge that they'd faced adversity, stood their ground, and emerged stronger. On the other side, life might throw challenges their way, but they knew one thing for sure: they'd always have each other's backs.